The wounded cowboy rode him music through Martha Vance's open gate just before noon. He was still sitting in the saddle, but barely. Blood darkened one shoulder of his shirt. The stain was the color of a bruised plum. His battered hat hung low over a face gray with exhaustion. Trail dust clung to the creases of his skin like a second layer of grief. When he lifted his head and looked at Martha, there was no threat in his eyes, only a silent, desperate plea for help. Martha raised her Winchester and kept it aimed at his chest. The metal was hot from the Montana sun. She was a widowed single mother running a failing ranch alone. She had a 10-year-old son named Leo to protect. She had debts she could barely meet. She had no reason to trust a strange man carrying a gun. "State your business," she called. Her voice was as sharp as a winter frost. The stranger tried to answer, but no sound came. His fingers tightened weakly around the saddle horn. His knuckles were white and shaking. His bay horse stood trembling beneath him. Its coat was streaked with sweat and the fine silt of the trail. For one long moment, Martha and the stranger simply stared at each other across the dusty ranch yard. He looked as though he had ridden through every mile of suffering the West could offer. Then his body swayed like a tree in a gale. Martha lowered the rifle by an inch. "Don't fall," she warned him. She did not know whether the words were meant for him or for herself. Montana in 1888 was a place where compassion could save a life or invite danger straight through your front door. Martha had learned that lesson the hard way. She was only 34. But the merciless frontier had carved exhaustion into her face. It had also carved a quiet strength into her hands. Her husband James had died during the terrible winter of 1886-87. He snorts he had frozen in a blizzard while trying to bring a stranded calf home. Since then, Martha had lived for two things. Her son Leo and the Vance ranch James had died trying to save. Creditors wanted the land. A powerful cattleman named Barrett Miller wanted its water. Every broken fence reminded her that she was running out of time. Now a wounded stranger had arrived at her gates. Before Martha could decide whether he was a danger, gravity made the choice for her. He slipped from the saddle like a sack of spent grain. He struck the dry earth hard, sending a cloud of dust around him. Martha dropped her rifle and ran. Her maternal instincts overrode her fear. "Leo, bring the water bucket now," she called toward the barns. She knelt in the dirt beside the stranger. The heat of the earth radiated through her heavy skirts. The metallic tang of blood and the sour stench of old sweat hit her instantly. A dark wet stain had turned his canvas coat into a heavy sodden weight. The wound was high on his shoulder, a bullet hole. The man's eyes were closed. His long lashes were caked with the silt of the Montana Trail. Yet somehow in unconsciousness, he looked peaceful. Leo arrived quickly. His small hands were white-knuckled around the handle of a wooden bucket. "Is he dead, Mama?" the boy whispered. His voice was trembling like a leaf in the wind. Martha pressed two fingers to the man's neck. She was searching for the spark of life. A pulse flickered there. It was weak and erratic. It felt like the wings of a moth hitting a lantern. "No, Leo, but he's knocking on the door." Together, mother and son dragged the man onto a piece of heavy canvas. They hauled him toward the house. Marta's muscles screamed with a familiar burning strain. They got him inside. They placed him on the small cot in the kitchen. This was the heart of her home. Martha took her sewing shears. They were the ones her mother had given her in Missouri. She cut away the blood-soaked shirt. The wound was swollen and badly torn. The bullet had lodged near the back of his shoulder. It was sitting just beneath the damaged muscle. Martha felt a wave of nausea. A memory of James's cold body flickered in her mind. She pushed it down with an iron will. She had birthed a child in a cabin. She had buried a husband in a blizzard. She could do this. She was no doctor, but frontier life had taught her more than she had ever wanted to know. She had cleaned James's wounds after long cattle drives. Her snorts had helped a neighbor through a difficult birth. She had once stitched a ranch hand's leg after a fall from a wagon. She cleaned the wound with boiled water. She used a small measure of whiskey from James's old medicine cabinet. The stranger groaned as she worked, but his eyes remained closed. Martha sterilized a pair of narrow pliers over a flames. He snorts. Leo placed the lamp beside her and waited near the doorway. Martha kept his view of the wound blocked with her shoulder. The boy was trying not to look frightened. She carefully searched for the lead. She found it. She removed the flattened piece of metal with steady hands. It dropped into the tin cup with a sharp clink. Martha released the breath she had been holding. She opened the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. Hey snorts, she removed the last clean wedding sheet she owned. For a moment, her fingers rested on the fine linen. James had once laughed beneath those sheets. Leo had been wrapped in them as a newborn. Then Martha lifted the shears. She cut the fabric into long white strips. She used them to save a stranger's life. As night fell over the bitter root, the fever took its turn with him. Martha sat by his side. She bathed his forehead with cool water from the well. She watched his face in the flickering amber light of the kerosene lamp. Once in the uncertain light, the shape of his brow reminded her of James. The resemblance lasted only a heartbeat. James had carried his kindness openly. The stranger carried his behind locked doors and old scars. Martha felt a guilty pang for noticing the difference. He must have heard Martha calling the boy's name during the fever. Then the stranger murmured Leo's name in his sleep. Even unconscious, some part of him had remembered it. He was handsome in a rugged, shattered sort of way. His jaw was shadowed by dark, thick stubble. His hands were thick and scarred. They were the hands of a man who knew the weight of a tool and a weapon. He looked like a man who had seen the worst of the world. Leo watched from the doorway. He was a shadow in his own home. Who is he, Mama? I don't know, son. Just a traveler who ran out of road. Why did someone shoot him? Martha looked at the stranger's belt on the table. He carried a heavy, cold peacemaker. The bluing was worn off from years of use. Inside his saddlebag, Martha noticed a wax packet of papers tied with cord. A faded federal seal marked the outer page. She did not open it. Whatever secrets the stranger carried, they still belonged to him. There was no badge on his coat. There was no mark of the law. The world is a violent place, Leo. It doesn't always need a reason. Go to sleep. For 3 days, the man hovered in the space between life and death. Martha barely slept. Her body was fueled by coffee and a strange new purpose. She tended to the ranch by day. Her chores were a blur of exhaustion. She milked the lone cow. She hoed the struggling garden. Her back ached under the relentless sun. She felt the weight of her loneliness more than ever. She missed the sound of a man's voice. Even an unconscious man in the house changed the air. On the 4th morning, the stranger's eyes snapped open. They were a deep, piercing blue. They looked like the sky just before a summer storm. He looked at the rafters with profound confusion. Where? His voice was a ghost of a sound. Martha stepped into his line of sight. Her expression was unreadable. You're at the Vance Ranch near Hamilton, Montana. He tried to sit up. The color drained from his face as if a plug had been pulled. Easy, Martha said. Her hand was firm on his good shoulder. You've lost enough blood to fill a trough, and I have the lead to prove it. He looked at her, then he looked past the apron and the dirt. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes. He saw the silver strands in her hair. He saw the strength that kept her spine straight. You did this? He asked, looking at the white bandages. I did. Thank you, ma'am. I reckon I owe you a debt I can't pay. I'm Martha. Martha Vance Gabriel Thorne, he whispered. The name sounded like a confession. He didn't offer his history. Martha didn't pry. On the frontier, a man's past was a private grave. You didn't dig it up without permission. Gabriel recovered slowly. During the first week, walking from the cot to the porch left him pale. He was often breathless. His injured arm remained bound close to his chest. Martha allowed him no heavy work. He could only peel potatoes or sharpen tools. By the 2nd week, he could carry a water bucket with his good arm. By the 3rd, he began repairing small things. Even then, the wound troubled him. Some mornings, Martha found him gripping the porch rail. He waited for the pain to pass. He was too proud to admit the struggle. Lifting a hammer still felt like tearing his shoulder open. Yet he kept working. He worked carefully and without complaint. He mended the front gate. It had been sagging like a broken wing for a year. He fixed the handles on the water buckets. He sharpened every dull tool in the shed. Then he turned his attention to the barn. It was the weathered remains of James's ambition. Martha watched him from the kitchen window. She was kneading dough. He moved with a quiet grace. There was a deliberate economy in his motion. It fascinated her. He was endlessly patient with Leo. The boy had forgotten what it was to have a man to follow. Gabriel taught Leo how to properly hone a knife. He showed him how to make the edge disappear. He showed him how to track a deer through the brush. They moved without snapping a single twig. Leo followed him like a shadow. His young face was bright with hero worship. It made Martha's heart ache. The boy had been starving for a father. Gabriel was a natural teacher. One afternoon, Martha was making lye soap. She used a large iron pot over an outdoor fire. The smell of animal fats filled the air. The sharp fumes of the lye stung her eyes. It was a chore she hated. It was dangerous and exhausting. Gabriel walked over. He took the heavy wooden paddle from her. I'll stir, Martha. Your arms have done enough for one day. It's woman's work, Gabriel. You have fences to worry about. Work is work, he said. His voice was a low rumble, and heat is heat. He stirred the thick mixture with steady strokes. Martha sat on a stump. She wiped her face with her apron. She felt a strange lightness in her chest. Virginia, long before the world went to hell. The war. I was a scout for the Union. After the war, there was no farm waiting for me. The Pinkerton Agency needed men who could track and survive. I needed a reason to keep moving. I saw things that make this valley look like Eden. Martha looked at him with new eyes. She saw the weight of the history he carried. That explained the way he watched every horizon. It explained the discipline in his movements and the silence that seemed to live in his bones. But it did not explain who had shot him so recently. Why are you out here so far from home? Gabriel smiled faded. A shadow of old grief replaced it. I was looking for a place where the wind would wash the blood off my hands. And did you find it? He looked at her for a heartbeat. The world narrowed down to that spot by the fire. I think I might have if the world lets me stay. News in the valley traveled fast. It moved like a grass fire in August. 2 days later, a rider appeared at the gate. He did not come in peace. It was Barrett Miller. Miller owned the largest ranch in the valley. It was a kingdom built on the misery of others. He was a man of cold eyes and expensive cigars. He had a soul made of ledger ink. He had been trying to buy Martha's land for a pittance. He didn't want her house. He wanted her water rights. The creek on her land was the lifeblood of the valley. Without it, Miller's cattle would thirst while he grew richer. Martha met him on the porch. Her rifle was held loosely but ready. "Miller," she said. Her voice was as hard as flint. "I heard you have a guest." "It's Martha," Miller said. His horse danced beneath him. He stayed in the saddle. It was a position of practiced superiority. A wounded man. A dangerous man. He's a human being who needed a bandage. That's all. Miller leaned forward. His shadow fell over her. This valley is changing. Martha, we don't need drifters bringing filth here. The only filth I see is currently sitting on a horse in my yard. Barrett. Miller's face darkened to a bruised purple. You're a widow alone. You can't protect this place. You certainly can't protect a criminal. I've protected this place since the day James died. I have no intention of stopping now, have you? Look at your fences. Look at that barn. It's rotting. He smiled a cruel, thin smile. Sell to me, Martha. Take the boy and find a quiet life back east. You don't belong here. This is my home, Miller. My husband is buried on that hill. Dead men don't pay taxes and they don't hold off men like me. He turned his horse and rode away. He left a trail of dust and a promise of violence. Martha went back inside. Her hands were shaking violently. She had to hide them in her skirts. Gabriel was sitting up on the cot. His face was tight with pain. His snorts had heard every word through the thin walls. He wants your land, Gabriel said. His voice was low and dangerous. He won't get it. Not while I'm breathing. Gabriel looked at his bandaged shoulder. A man like Barrett Miller doesn't take no for an answer. He takes what he wants. I know that better than anyone. I can help, Gabriel said, his blue eyes locked onto hers. You can barely walk to the wash basin, Mr. Thorne. I can mend a fence. I can fix a roof. I've done it in a dozen states. Why would you risk your life for a patch of dirt that isn't yours? Gabriel looked out the window at the vast horizon. Because you saved my life when you had every reason to leave me. And because I've spent too long running from men like Miller. That evening they sat on the porch together. The sun dipped behind the peaks. The sky was a canvas of violet and orange. The crickets began their nightly chorus. It was a moment of peace. It felt fragile like spun glass. It's beautiful, Gabriel said. It's a hard beauty, Martha replied. She looked at her scarred hands. The best things in this life usually are. Gabriel's hand moved across the porch between them. It stopped before touching hers. Martha looked down at the small distance separating their fingers. No man had reached for her since James died. For a moment, guilt rose inside her. Then Gabriel's little finger brushed hers. It was warm and careful. He seemed to fear she might break. Martha could have pulled away. She did not slowly. She turned her hand beneath his. She allowed their palms to meet. The touch was not a promise. But for the first time in years, Martha remembered a feeling. She remembered what it felt like not to carry every burden alone. But hope is a dangerous luxury. The next morning, the dream was shattered. They found the lone cow dead near the creek. It wasn't a mountain lion. The animal had been poisoned with tainted grain. Someone had left the tainted grain beside the creek during the night. Leo cried when he saw the animal. His small shoulders shook with the weight of the loss. Martha felt a cold crystalline anger rising. It was a fire that didn't burn. Miller, she whispered. Her eyes turned into chips of blue ice. Gabriel examined the grain. His face hardened into a mask of war. He's trying to starve you out. He wants to break your spirit. I have flour, I have bacon. We will not starve. But without the cow, Leo will have no milk, and we will have nothing left to trade in town. He won't stop at the cow, Martha. Men like him only stop when they're stopped. Gabriel went to his saddlebags. He pulled out a heavy leather holster. The quiet ranch hand disappeared. In his place stood the trained man Gabriel had tried to leave behind. He strapped the Colt to his hip with practiced familiarity. Stay inside today. Keep Leo in the house. Gabriel, don't do anything you can't come back from. Protecting what's yours isn't a sin, Martha. It's a requirement. Then a notice arrived from the Territorial Land Office. It claimed that a portion of Martha's Creek had been surveyed incorrectly. It said her water rights were under review. The paper carried an official stamp. Gabriel recognized the clerk's signature. "He works for Miller," Gabriel said. Martha stared at the notice. "Can he take the creek? Not legally, but he can bury you in hearings. He will make it so you can no longer afford to fight." For the first time, Martha understood Miller's plan. He did not need to shoot her to destroy the ranch. He only needed to make survival too expensive. She went to the kitchen that night. She found Gabriel cleaning his gun. The smell of gun oil was thick and cloying. "Tell me the truth, Gabriel. Why were you really shot?" He looked up. His blue eyes were cold and distant. "My last Pinkerton assignment was to investigate a land-grabbing ring operating across Idaho and Montana. Miller's friends, it's the same breed. The papers in my saddlebag are copies of federal land surveys. They prove that cattlemen have been fencing public land. They are changing boundary markers. They are forcing smaller ranchers to sell. So they're still looking for you. You brought them here." "I did, and for that I am truly sorry." Martha sat across from him. The candle flame danced in her eyes. "You're putting us in danger just by being under this roof." "I know. I should leave before the sun comes up." Martha looked at the empty chair where James used to sit. She looked at the mended gate. She thought about the way Leo looked at Gabriel. "No," she said. Her voice was like a hammer on an anvil. "Martha, you don't understand the violence these men bring. If you leave, Miller wins. If you stay, we have a fighting chance. I could bring a war to your doorstep. The war has been here since 1887. Gabriel, it began the day I buried my heart in the frost." She reached across the table and took his hand. Her grip was unyielding. "We fight it together or we don't fight it at all." Martha was not choosing Gabriel over her son. She was choosing to defend the only home Leo had ever known. She would not surrender his future to a bully. Still, she understood the danger. From that night forward, a loaded rifle remained near the door. Leo was never allowed beyond the yard alone. The pressure from Miller escalated. He started a poison-tongued rumor in town. He said Martha was living in sin with a hired killer. The women at the church began to look away. It was a social death sentence. It was a cold shunning that hurt worse than a blow. Martha felt the sting of their judgment everywhere. One Sunday, she decided she would not be hidden. She dressed in her best black silk dress. It was the one she wore to James' funeral. She brushed her hair until it shone like a raven's wing. She took Leo to the small white clapboard church. Gabriel stayed at the ranch as a silent sentinel. When Martha entered the church, the singing died. It was a sudden, ugly death. She walked down the aisle with her chin up. She sat in her usual pew. The wood felt colder than she remembered. The preacher spoke of morality. He spoke of the Jezebels who harbored the lawless. He looked directly at Martha. His eyes were full of a righteous, hollow fire. After the service, the congregation spilled out. A woman named Mrs. Higgins stepped forward. "Martha Vance," she said, "we are deeply concerned about the example you are setting for your son." Martha turned to face her. Her expression was as calm as a frozen lake. "My son is being raised to be a man of character, Mrs. Higgins, unlike some. By a drifter, by a man who keeps a gun on your table. He came to my gate half dead," Martha snapped. "Since then, he has worked beside me to save everything my son and I have left." The crowd let out a sharp gasp. "It's indecent, Martha. It's a stain on this valley. What's indecent is a neighbor trying to steal a widow's land while her friends turn their backs." Martha took Leo's hand. She walked to their wagon. She felt the tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of those wolves. When she got back, she went straight to the barn. She began to brush the horse with ferocity. Gabriel found her there. "They were cruel, weren't they? Through the dam. If you leave, they win. Everyone wins except us." Gabriel stepped toward her. He opened his arms, but he did not touch her until Martha crossed the space. He wrapped her arms around her. He held her against his chest. He smelled of cedar, tobacco, and honest sweat. He was a solid, warm presence. Martha cried into his shirt. She cried for James and the dead cow. She cried for the loneliness that had nearly eaten her alive. Gabriel held her. His large hand stroked her hair with tenderness. He didn't promise it would be okay. He was too honest for lies. But he stayed, and in the West, staying was everything. If Martha's courage has touched your heart, subscribe and tell us. Would you have trusted Gabriel enough to let him stay? The final confrontation arrived a week later. It was a hot, breathless Tuesday. The air felt like it was waiting for a spark. As Miller arrived with 4 men, they were carrying torches and rifles. Gabriel saw them coming. "Get Leo to the root cellar," Gabriel said. "Stay there until your mother comes for you." Martha ran inside. She led Leo down the cellar steps. She placed both hands on his shoulders. "Lift the wooden bar into place after I leave," she told him. "Do not open it for anyone except me or Gabriel." Leo nodded through his tears. Martha waited until she heard the bar slide into place from inside. She took up her Winchester. She returned to the porch. Fine, Gabriel said. He saw the iron in her eyes. Stay low. Don't fire unless they fire first, and do not leave the porch. The riders stopped at the front gate. Wance, come out and face your reckoning, Miller shouted. Gabriel stepped onto the porch. His hand rested on the grip of his Colt. You're trespassing, Miller. Turn around. I'm here to collect the debt this valley owes me. The law says this land belongs to Martha Vance. The law is a long way off. Out here, I am the law. Miller signaled to his men. One of them lit a torch. He threw it toward the dry timber of the barn. The wood ignited instantly. A roar of orange flame licked the sky. No, Martha cried. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He drew his peacemaker in a blur of motion. A shot rang out. The torch thrower cried out and fell from his saddle. The quiet valley erupted in gunfire. Bullets splintered the porch railings. Martha fired her rifle. The recoil bruised her shoulder. She wasn't aiming to kill. She was aiming to defend her home. The air was filled with black smoke. Gabriel moved like a shadow. He jumped off the porch and used the water trough for cover. He fired with the controlled precision of a trained soldier. 2 more of Miller's men were hit. They began a panicked retreat. Miller was cowering behind his horse. His face was pale with shock. Miller had expected Martha to surrender. Instead, she stood beside Gabriel with a steady rifle. Stop! Martha shouted. The firing ceased. The barn was a towering inferno, but the men were broken. Miller looked at Gabriel. He realized who he was facing. You've killed a man, Thorne. The sheriff will hang you. As Gabriel walked toward him. His gun was leveled at Miller's heart. I only wounded him. He'll live. He pointed to the man on the ground. He was clutching his wounded leg and groaning. Now get off this land. You think a wounded drifter and a widow can frighten me, Miller said. Gabriel reached into his pocket and removed a folded paper. I have friends in Helena, Miller spat. So do the men investigating you. Gabriel unfolded the paper without lowering his gun. This is a copy of the federal survey those men tried to kill me for. It shows that you moved boundary markers. You fenced nearly 300 acres of federal land. Miller's face turned the color of ash. You're lying. The original documents reached the territorial marshal 3 days ago. A second copy is already in Helena. Gabriel took one step closer. If I die here, the investigation continues. If Martha dies, the investigation continues. You cannot burn this evidence, Miller. It is no longer on this ranch. Miller looked from Gabriel's gun to the wounded man around him. Whatever courage he had brought to the ranch was gone. He helped his man onto a horse. He rode away into the dust. They watched him go until he was a memory. Then the reality of the loss hit Martha. The barn, she whispered. They spent the next 3 hours fighting the fire. By sunset, the barn was a charred, skeletal ruin. Only then did Martha return to the root cellar. Leo, it's me. She heard the bar slide back. Leo climbed the steps. Soot was drifting through the evening air. He looked at the ruin. He ran straight into his mother's arms. I thought I was going to lose you too, he whispered. The words struck Martha harder than the fire. She knelt and held him close. You did exactly what I asked, she said. Your father would have been proud of you. Gabriel turned away for a moment. He fought the emotion rising in his own throat. His shirt was torn and fresh blood had seeped through the bandage where his old shoulder wound had reopened. Martha sat on the scorched ground. Her face was covered in soot and tears. Her best silk dress was a rag. Gabriel sat beside her. I'm so sorry, Martha. I couldn't save it. It's just wood and hay, Gabriel. It can be rebuilt. With what? We have no money left. As Martha looked at him, she saw the love in his eyes. We have the land and we have each other. We'll find a way. 2 weeks after the fire, a territorial marshal arrived with 2 federal surveyors. They examined the creek and checked the boundary markers. The records confirmed Gabriel's evidence. Miller was charged with land fraud and intimidation. The men who had hunted Gabriel were arrested. For the first time since James died, Martha knew the ranch was legally safe. Through the remaining weeks of summer and into autumn, they rebuilt. Gabriel sold his fine bay horse. It was his only companion of 5 years. He used the money to buy lumber. Leo stood beside him as the horse disappeared down the road. Will you leave when the barn is finished? The boy asked. Gabriel looked toward Martha on the porch. I don't know yet. Leo lowered his eyes. I hope you don't. Gabriel placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. In return, Martha did the unthinkable. She took James's gold wedding ring. She took it to the jeweler in town. She sold it to buy a new cow and seed. It was a piece of her past given for their future. The community did not change all at once, but little by little silence gave way to help. An elderly rancher named Amos brought a wagon of timber. Then Mrs. Higgins left a pie on Martha's porch. Martha accepted what was offered with quiet dignity. As the first frost touched the bitter root, Gabriel finally made his choice. He came into the kitchen one evening. Martha was working on a quilt. Martha, Gabriel said. She looked up. Her heart was skipping a beat. The investigation is finished. My work for the agency is done. Martha felt a cold knot of fear. Is it? The men who shot me are in a cell. I'm a free man. Then stay. Stay and help me finish this quilt. I have no land, no horse, and little money. Martha put down her work. She walked to him and took his hands. You offered me a mended gate when I was falling apart. You offered my son a future. She leaned forward and kissed his forehead. That's more than any woman could ask for. Gabriel's hardness finally melted. I don't know how to be a rancher, Martha. I'll teach you, she whispered. And you can teach me how to be happy again. They were married on a crisp morning in November.